Thank you. I'm really excited actually to get into the nitty-gritty, to think specifically about the consequences of AI on work. And it allowed me in the outset to start with this tweet. And this is merely to give you another perspective. This is the feeling when you realize AI is going to steal your job. The computers, the robots are going to steal your job. Should have sound on this. Not that sound. I like it. It sort of felt like a This Morning package with that sort of incidental music. We can dip the music now, thank you. It was meant to have a little sound effect on it, but let's not worry. Also, if you are interested, all of my slides I'll give you a URL at the end. So if you're interested in any of the research I mentioned or any of the examples, I'll give you the URL at the end. Look, firstly, I want you to go into thinking directly about how AI is going to impact innovation. One way to break down talks about innovation is to think about it in two different ways. Innovation can either be incremental or recombinant. Incremental is the stuff that most of us have in our jobs day to day. The idea that you get 3% better, you fine-tune processes. Every year you're sort of making a little step. Your business objectives go up. That's incremental innovation, making the trains go faster effectively. Recombinant innovation is when effectively we make leaps forward, we make jumps. That's where someone says, how about we put wheels on a suitcase? Or someone says, how about we combine this with this? And the joy of AI is that it's proving to be especially effective at recombinant innovation, the stuff that typically we find quite difficult to do. If you're interested in sort of following how AI is going to impact work, I would strongly recommend checking out this guy. And I'm going to show you a bit of his work now. So Professor Ethan Mullick teaches at Wharton Business School. And actually, he was confronted about 6 months ago when OpenAI launched ChatGPT. He was confronted with the challenge of how is AI going to disrupt my classrooms? He made the decision there and then to make AI compulsory in his classrooms. Really interestingly, he said he saw a couple of benefits straight away. First was language. Half of his students didn't speak English as a native language. And so they were immediately advantaged by the fact that they were able to create fluent work. But I'll show you some of the things that have come from him making AI compulsory. So firstly, he's used interesting challenges. Worth checking him out. He does a Substack newsletter, but he also tweets very regularly. Here's one challenge that he posed for ChatGPT. He asked it to come up with names for a pasta business and put them in a table. So I think specifically he wanted to come up with the names for a pasta restaurant. Like I say, if you want these slides, you can see them later. But immediately he gets names. What he was confronted by was he was disappointed with the names. The next thing he did is he gave it a guide to choosing brand names. He directed it towards that, and he asked the names to be improved based on that. So immediately, he's helping to develop and iterate. Next thing he did is he said, I want to know if any of these are trademarked. And immediately, the names that had been suggested to him were assessed, and they checked out whether they were the trademarks. And finally, he went through and he basically said, OK, now based on those criteria, can you give me names that will do this? Really interesting direct application and an illustration of how business professor is sort of testing the boundaries of what works and what doesn't work. I'll give you another example, and this comes from the studio of this woman. Zaha Hadid was probably is regarded as the greatest mind in architecture. She passed away about 5 years ago. But for a woman born in Baghdad in Iraq to become the best regarded architect in the world was a considerable feat. And it's largely because the work that she created had such beauty to it. She was sometimes, this is a place in Azerbaijan, and the beauty of her buildings often have glowing organic curves to them. They've really got a sort of a beautiful symmetry to the structures. This is another one. This is a building, looks like a UFO in the middle of Seoul. This is the DDB Center. And she becomes famous for this. But what was really interesting, a couple of weeks ago, one of the architects who works for Zaha Hadid, a studio, talked about how they're using AI. And effectively, they're using AI to help them continue in the tradition of her work. So this is an AI creation for a project they were looking at in Saudi. This is another series. And effectively, what was really interesting was that the examples that were being created, they were actually using prompts. You can see it on this one here. They were actually asking, in this case, they were using Daisley. They were asking it to imagine a building created by Zaha Hadid. So effectively using the way that her buildings have trained the AI to imagine what it might look like in context. I'll give you another example. And this really sort of helps put all of this in context. When we look at the impact of AI, we see that actually it's businesses that are going to be very much based on pattern recognition and trends in data that are going to be most affected. One of the things that you might know is one of the professions that's most likely to be severely disrupted is the legal profession. Most of law is pattern recognition. Seeing a case, seeing if there's a precedent for that case, and then developing an argument based on that precedent. And as a result of that, it's believed that about 44% of tasks in legal are going to be easily replicated by AI. Similarly, admin jobs, 46% of jobs in admin are going to be replicated by AI. So look, actually, across the whole field, it's pretty evident we're going to see a lot of transformation. But in truth, I wanted to look at something that's more important to the people in the room. So we know AI is going to impact the way we work. We know it's going to give us this opportunity to develop recombinant innovation. It's going to give us the opportunity to draw from elements of what we've seen in the past and draw from it. But truthfully, how is it going to transform the experience of work for all of us? I work with a lot of organisations looking at their cultures, and in truth, most cultures are far more similar than you realise. It's largely because cultures largely are defined by three things. They're defined by calendars, messages, and buildings. And we only realise that when you start taking them away. So buildings play an enormous part in workplace culture, but we didn't recognise that they were a choice. It was only a few years ago, at the start of the pandemic, that we recognised that actually how you use buildings and offices was a decision. Most of us until then had been in a situation when if we had a new job, no one would even have a question about how many days you were going to be there and what hours you were there. You recognise that only by removing it plays a part. But calendars and messages also play a really significant element in how we do our jobs. Most of us feel that we have 20 plus hours a week of meetings, digital meetings. It plays a huge part in terms of the way we do our jobs. The consequence of all of those things, if we're thinking about where we are in work right now, there's a ubiquitous hurry sickness. Now, hurry sickness, that sense that you always want to check your phone because there's new messages coming in. You always want to feel like you're connected to work because you know there's probably something there. In extreme, hurry sickness is the reason why we've got such an overwhelming sense of burnout running through people. That's constant sense of availability. There was a piece of work analysing the way that connection plays in our lives, suggesting that if your work asks you to stay connected to email, you generally give about 70 hours a week of mental availability to your job. So we find ourselves in this constant adrenalised hurry sickness that extends way into the reaches of work. And critically, if then we're going to think about how AI is going to change work, we need to think about how AI is going to operate with those things. I mentioned buildings, calendars, and emails play the fundamental, foundational pillars for most organisational culture. And the truth is that the culture lives between those pillars. So culture normally lives in the gaps. It's one of the reasons why we find that when people do meet face-to-face, the interactions and the quality of the interactions seem to enhance what they're able to do digitally, because it's the interactions that play a part between that plays a really significant part. I'll give you a little piece of evidence that proves this and demonstrates it, because I think it helps you empathise with where culture lives and how actually any of us can feel benefiting from culture. Two examples here. A group of rail workers, and they were doing night shifts on railway. So typically, night shifts are incredibly bad for our health, associated with shorter lifespan and generally higher stress levels. But they were compared to warehouse workers who were working day shifts. Now, specifically, looking into the details of the job helps us understand the lived experience and how the culture played a part. The railway workers, they were working 3 night shifts in a row, but critically, they ate together, they sat together, and they had breaks together. The warehouse workers were wearing headphones. They would go on individual breaks. When we look at the experience of the two, the warehouse workers not only felt incredibly isolated, their stress levels were higher, but they felt very difficult to connect with the purpose and the objective of their job. In contrast, the railway workers, whose the breaks, the spaces between things were enabling them to connect with each other, reported high levels of engagement, high levels of satisfaction, and a high level of understanding of why they were doing their jobs. In that case study, I think we can just start to see why gaps are important. I've got a friend who works at the Whittington Hospital in North London, and she said one of the things that's happened to them over the last few years is that tea breaks were where culture was created. And as tea breaks have been forced out by the level of work, they've seen the culture dissipate. It's a really critical understanding. If we're going to understand culture, lives in the gaps between things rather than necessarily in the spreadsheets and details. Critically then, if AI is going to impact work, it's going to enable us to bring more of those gaps. I've been chatting to the team at Microsoft, and they said one of the things that they believe that AI will do is summarize meetings so that people don't need to attend meetings themselves, providing a gap, giving a gap in people's calendars. And if we understand that the way that we're going to make work better going forward is by reduction rather than addition, critically, I think it's a really valuable moment for us to think about. Can AI and can the tools that are coming to us reduce the demands on us so they enable more gaps between things? Then they now allow more connection. The final caveat I'll add is just a learning of experience. I worked for a long time in social media. I worked before that at YouTube. One of the things we know is that most technology comes to us and is greeted with optimism. It's only afterwards we start recognizing the complication behind it. And so critically, as any of us right now are thinking about the application of AI, absolutely it's a time for inspiration, motivation, but critically we need to remember the lesson of the past, that most technology is greeted with optimism and becomes consumed with reality. And understanding the downside and the unexpected consequences is going to play a really critical part. Really grateful for the opportunity to come briefly and sort of muse on some of these issues. AI is clearly going to transform all of our jobs, and it's the attitude we have and the opportunity that we reap from it that will determine the outcome. Thank you.